Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to more Battlefleet Gothic. I'm just doing a quick rundown of all the different factions to help out newer players, and we're on to the Orcs. This is an interesting faction in that they're very limited in what they can get away with and what they can do. That's because the Orcs are the least subtle of all the factions. Let's go ahead and look right away at some of their traits, because this is actually different from the previous two factions. First of all, Orc accuracy. Every faction has accuracy statistics. It's just that Orcs have by far the worst accuracy in the game. You don't normally pay attention to this number, but you have to note that the Orcs do have a 0% at 12k units. So if you manage to get some long-range guns on these guys, it's not necessarily going to work out well. Now, there are certain types of guns in this game that have 100% accuracy, so even at 12k units, so things like the Zap Cannon, which are their equivalent to lances, will automatically hit. So you don't have to worry about it in that sense, but you do be aware that the Orcs designed for very close range fighting here. Next is Savage Boarding, more of that same sort of very close range thing. They get an additional assault action when they board an enemy ship. They've got Disorganized. That means that they're more likely to be insubordinate and cause their ships to flee when things go a little bit badly. Not only that, but they're Squigless, which means that you can't actually execute your captain if the ship goes insubordinate and tries to run away. Next, instead of all ahead full, they've got the big red button. You hit the big red button and the ship goes faster. It's actually more speed than all ahead full, but it's at a shorter duration, and they also don't have the maneuvers to the side, left or right, and they can't toggle it off. You have to wait until your fuel is out, and then you have to wait for it to recharge fully before you're allowed to use the big red button again. So that kind of doesn't work well there. Next, you've got Noisy Orcs. There's no real way for them to run silently by default. There is actually a doctrine that lets them do that later, a favor that lets them do that, and custom. And this is how you get different types of ships with the Orcs. So let's go into light cruisers and show you what I'm talking about here. So here you can see we've got one custom point for a light cruiser. And what custom points are is a way to make your ship work differently than the default. And the default here is lots of guns, which are your basic sort of macro battery type weapon. It's got decent range out to 6,000. So it's got okay range if you need to hit people that are further away. This is what you would do it with. But the damage is low. The rate of fire is what sort of makes this competent. And also there's a random variable element to guns. Sometimes it fires more, sometimes it fires less. So it's kind of wonky in that sense. Next you've got the Prow Torpedo Launcher. It's a Prow Weak Torpedo Launcher. It launches 4. These guys have the ability to launch boarding torpedoes, which cause critical hits, just like boarding ships. Excellent if you can manage to land or connect with them, but they're hard to use. Personally, I like to switch that one out in a lot of situations, but not necessarily here. So one of our upgrades that we could potentially get is we can swap the torpedoes for a Mega Cannon, and this is 144 damage. It has a rate of fire of 12 seconds, so it's very slow, but if you manage to get in close to an enemy, get to within that 3,000 range, and hit an opponent with this, it does so much damage. It just is an instant like death sentence, basically. There is that sort of random element as to whether or not you're going to hit with that, because it's a single big shot every few seconds, or every 12 seconds rather, but if it does connect, it's definitely worth it, and for that purpose, it's a good weapon to have. As well, when you're about to clash with the enemy, when you're sort of heading towards them and then you're about to turn off, this does strip shields very effectively and very quickly. So it's a good choice in a lot of situations for just a bruiser type ship that's just going to run up there, hit it with a Mega Cannon, and then have access to these longer range, lots of guns on the sides. So we're going to go ahead and get one of our ship with that Mega Cannon up front there. And next up, we're going to go ahead and look at this sort of arrangement. I kind of like getting one of our ships with the next upgrade here. That's lots of heavy cannons. They replace your lots of guns. Now, this gives the ship only Proud Torpedo launches if it wants to fire at longer ranges. So it's got a huge amount of damage at short range. It does 48 damage on a broadside, so there's actually more than one gun firing this broadside. Out to a range of only 3,000 though, so if you get stuck against an opponent that has a bit of range, then these lots of heavy guns are going to do absolutely terribly. So you do need to be up close and personal before you can fire this gun effectively. But huge damage, huge critical chances. It's just a really good broadside. If you can keep an opponent stuck there for whatever reason, then this is going to be a great ship to keep alongside them. So this is basically our close-range beat-up ship. We're going to go ahead and get one of those. And lastly, we're going to go ahead and get one ship, potentially, with the last option here, and that's the Grot Ship's Launcher. You actually get 2 of these, I believe. We'll double-check that, but This sort of lets the Orcs kind of try and fend off fighters, and this can be extremely important if you're fighting against someone like Chaos. It's also important against certain factions like Eldar, where they could just potentially skirt around you. The problem is that this leaves it without really any guns. All it has is the torpedo launcher and the ships, and that's not exactly a great combination. So this becomes extremely vulnerable to... Actually, you know, we're gonna save that for later, I think. I feel like saving that for a little bit later. For now, let's go ahead and have a second one with the lots of heavy cannons. I think that that's usually a pretty decent starting thing. Well, no, I'll get this one just in case. I think that either or is kind of the way I go with that. I think that the heavy cannons, though, is a little bit more reliable. The ships are good, but this becomes like... You can see that it's got two sets of launch bays, meaning that it's as good a carrier in some ways as the Chaos one. It's just that the Chaos one is more adequately equipped for that kind of hit and run, I'm a carrier trying to avoid combat kind of play. This one basically sits in combat as a lump and has no means of contributing outside of dumping its ships and then sitting there hoping that maybe someone walks in front of its torpedoes. So it's kind of a defenseless ship, and that could be a problem in some situations. Alright, so anyway, we've got this one ship. It's got the mega cannon up on the front there. I like to give the one with the cannon up front the micro warp jump. I find that it helps me sort of make sure that my micro warp, or my mega cannon is facing in the right direction when I need it. And Orcs have a major weakness in terms of their maneuverability and stuff like this. This is sort of our catching ship. It can chase down ships a little bit with the big red button, firing that big gun at the front of there, hopefully knocking out ship systems before they can get away. And the micro warp jump helps them a little bit with that. The guns on the sides are the longer range ones, giving me 6,000 range guns that are not normally that easy to get with these guys. So it lets me sort of flog away at the enemy from a distance there. Next, we're going to go with our second one. This is going to be our close-range punching ship. This is going to just be very, very focused on that. And this is also going to be our counter-Eldar type ship. For that purpose, again, taunt is extremely important. And for our last one, this one's just going to be launching fighters and is going to actually be probably focused on boarding actions because there's not a lot of weapons that I can really upgrade on this. So we're going to get WOG on this one. That's a support ability that increases the likelihood or increases the number of boarding actions you can do. It only affects boarding actions. It does not affect assault boats. It does not affect teleportation strikes. It is only getting up close and personal to the enemy and using a boarding action. So that is the way that those ships sort of work. And this is basically everything except the core basic ship, which would be a very good long-range one, but is kind of low damage and doesn't really have anything great going for it. This ship here, if it gets alongside of an opponent, it gets to use that taunt while it's on broadsides. Gonna do huge, huge damage to them using those mega cannons. Here you can see those mega cannons right over there. Beautiful, beautiful things there. Lots and lots of damage from them, but not exactly the biggest volleys, not exactly the fastest rate of fire. So you have to keep them there for quite a while. Our ship over here, you know, they've got more guns here. They've got lots of guns. And they can chip away at an opponent, but they deal very, very poor damage. It's just, they have to rack that damage up slowly over time by firing over and over and over again. But they've got the range on this one. If I need to finish something off, I can always face it forward and give them a bit of a poke with our nose cannon there. And this one has those carriers. Now, has those fighters, which I'm mostly going to be using to screen my fleet in a lot of these early stages until we get against opponents that don't have any ships of their own, in which case, of course, you know, assault boats and such to disable engines is a great choice for these guys. But anyway, what else we got here? We got escort ships. These are the brute ram ships. Now, these guys are kind of interesting because they have the 75 frontal armor and they deal extra damage when ramming. The problem with the power ram is that it, even with a 50% increase, since it's a light ship, it doesn't actually deal that much damage on a ram. It would deal a lot of damage to an escort, but the problem is that you're never going to easily line up an escort versus an escort ram. It's kind of like hitting a needle with another needle. It's quite difficult. It's possible, but honestly, I would kind of give that a skip. The best thing about these, though, is that you can actually lose as many of these ships as you want, and it doesn't have any negative repercussions as far as insubordination goes, so they're extremely, extremely disposable. You can, in fact, just screen your army or your navy with these guys and let them get shot by things, and since they're what they are, that won't matter one bit. Next, we got the Ravager attack ship. This is kind of interesting because it's got the torpedo launcher that fires off those torpedoes, but it can launch boarding torpedoes, making it the only type of escort that can board in some capacity. which is pretty interesting, but it's still, again, pretty fragile, pretty undergunned. It doesn't do that much damage, so unless you're really good at that torpedo micro, dealing with lots of little ships, this is not a great choice. The Savage Gunship is the next one. The other thing about this guy is that you've got plenty of torpedoes in most Orc fleets. The Savage Gunship is the interesting one here. They've got the heavy cannon here. It's the exact same as the heavy cannons that we put on the side of our Basha there, our second one. And that means that it can do huge, huge amounts of damage on a long reload time. But if you get a couple of these, this is actually when it's worthwhile to have escorts with the Orcs, because that is so much burst damage that you can actually take down a cruiser with a few good hits from those. So you can actually consider taking these just for that sort of burst damage. You get in close with the other Bashas, you take their shields down or whatever, and then you start just wailing at them with the Savage Gunships. They're not going to be able to turn around. They're not that fast, and they're not that maneuverable, even though they're an escort type ship. But you get them stuck in there. They're going to have that 75 front-facing armor, so you just face them towards the enemy and hope that that hull integrity of 200, that shield of 100, and that armor of 75 is going to see them through it. But pretty often they get exploded, so don't be too surprised if that happens to them. Last is the Onslaught attack ship, and I have really no idea why this exists. It's just got prow guns. Might as well take the Savage Gunship in almost every situation that you would consider ever taking this. The only reason this might be better is because it's got the 6,000 range. But in any event, let's go ahead and, so this is the composition I'd sort of recommend. The only thing that I would say is that you might not want to take a carrier right off the bat. You might want this other one to be another flank-firing big guy that's capable of dishing out a lot of hurt and a lot of pain to the enemy. But anyway, let's go ahead and search here. In all likelihood, we won't bring a carrier. It's kind of a specialty ship for certain situations that I'm not necessarily going to find myself in. But it can be extremely potent. It can be extremely good to sort of shut down people who are overly reliant on things like fighters. Alright, what have we got? What have we got here? Hopefully it'll be a relatively balanced battle. I've been getting a lot of very, very unbalanced ones where it's like me versus 300 fleet points when I've been starting these videos. That last one you saw that Orc player who has just like crushed me, but that's because he had a fleet that had all sorts of crazy shit that I couldn't compensate for. Alright, this isn't telling me what I'm up against. There's a sort of bug going on here, I guess, that's going to obfuscate what I'm fighting against. That's good. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take our first two ships of the line there, and we'll also go ahead and get the Savage Gunship, just because I do think they're actually worth taking. The last two factions, the Orcs and the Eldar, are the ones that have escorts that are worth taking, and that's because they've got ones that can actually dish out really, really respectable damage while still being 200 hit point sinks. For the Eldar, that's particularly funny because their light cruisers only have 400 hit points, so they have very expensive escorts though. So, all right, so let's line up our ships here. Pretty much normal stuff there. We're going to want boarding to be the default behavior. If we ever get close enough to board anybody, obviously we're going to want that to happen. But other than that, let's go ahead and have our ships... No, we don't need to change facing or anything like that. Let's just go ahead and hit start there. No landmines directly in front of us, or space mines or whatever. We're heading towards that cloud, but looks like my opponent is going to be hiding out in this this one over here. So... yeah, we're just going to head towards our opponent and see what happens. Hopefully it's not going to be one of those ones where he just sits there and hides in those bushes. I don't even know what faction I'm up against. It's going to be interesting to find out. I love how there's sort of like farts of gas coming out of the back of the Orc ships. It's kind of gross, but it's also kind of very appropriate for what they are. Just disgusting, disgusting troglodytes. Alright, so we could try and flush him out with a little bit of torpedo action, potentially. Given the speed from him, I don't think he's playing Eldar, so it should be relatively okay. We'll throw out boarding torpedoes. That's usually what you want to use with the Orcs, or anybody that's got boarding anything, because critical hits in this game are so much better than regular hits. Disabling systems in this, since they're irreparable, they just do a really good job of screwing over an opponent that's kind of reliant on those systems working. Ugh. Alright. Yeah, this is kind of lame when you've got an opponent who's willing to just sit in a gas cloud. But I can't really complain that much because I spent a lot of my games like just running around in circles, driving people absolutely bonkers. I don't know, they're probably still in there. I don't think they had any chance to move out. Let's just launch a couple more boarding torpedoes, see what happens, see if they move at all. See who flinches first, basically. So in this case, we still want to use Taunt on this guy. Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, we're up against Imperials, it looks like. Got a Cobra Destroyer, they've got 2 Type 1 Dauntlesses. Alright, so definitely something that we can fight here in close sort of quarters combat there. Just bashing away with our guns, hopefully. Alright. Probably launch another set of torpedoes at them before we actually engage here, but don't want to do anything like hit the big red button right now. We want to wait till we're sort of closer in. We'll try and destroy that Cobra Destroyer, I think, right off the bat. We'll launch these boarding torpedoes. They're not great against escorts, but he might try and move it out of the way at the expense of his other ships. Alright. Yeah, they're starting to turn all their ships there. And this might actually get one of his Dauntlesses. No, they managed to blow it up. Alright, we're going to aim at the generators for my opponent here. I'm going to get these prow weapons firing away at our opponent there. Let's just drop one of these here. And, well, this isn't brilliant for me. It's not brilliant for him either, so... Oh, shit. Alright, I think we still got the ram off successfully here. Not with this guy, but with the other one. Oh, we got a boarding off there. Are we going to get one off here as well? Oh, we already got one off. Alright, we got a bit of a ram here. Oh, and we've had a whole boatload of fires lit. Alright, so we're creating an Imperial sandwich here. A little bit of one. Let's go ahead and repair this ship here so it's not on fire as much. Alright, with our engines gone, we're going to be in a little bit of a pickle with that one ship. Fortunately, we've got another one, so it's not that big a deal. We've got an insubordinate captain over there on their side. Let's go ahead and lock and load that shot there. Or whatever. I don't know what I'm talking about right now. Alright, Cobra Destroyer firing some torpedoes. Fortunately, we are moving away, even though slowly, because our engines were destroyed. Let's go ahead and set you to front-firing behavior, actually. You've got a front-firing weapon there. Alright, so those lots of guns are doing their work against this little escort there. Those rapid-firing guns, I find, are a lot better at dealing with things like escorts. Alright, let's go ahead and red button this guy and see if we can't sprint up and destroy this guy. We might take some flak from that mine there, but if we can get in close... Boom! Yeah, that's why the Savage Gunship is still actually a good ship. It is too much damage. Like, I don't think so, buddy. What? Why can I not? Alright, well, he got away. But, yeah, that's how you use Orcs. Just get right in there. Just mix it up with them. There's no subtlety to them. There's no thinking to them. Just get as close as possible. Well, there's thinking. You have to figure out a way to cause an opponent to stick beside you so that you can hit him with those guns, those big hammery guns, and just watch their health bar just instantly evaporate once those guns come off cooldown. Because they take a while before they do, unless you just spammed out lots of guns. The variability of them actually works out quite well in their favor, because you'll have that burst damage from time to time. Like, it doesn't matter if you roll low, because they'll just chip away a little bit, whatever. But in this game, being able to deal a whole lot of damage all of a sudden often feels pretty strong compared to just steadily dealing damage, and I've found that to be consistently the case. Which is also why those big guns are such a big upgrade. Alright. So, let's look at our skills and abilities here. For our first ship here, now, one of the things that I didn't really talk about all that much is the basic statistics of these ships. They've got 800 hull integrity, 100 shields, a speed of a very snail, like 150, rotation of 15 degrees per second, but their troop value is a 70, which is a ridiculously high troop value. It means that these ships very, very unlikely to get taken over by boarding actions by default. Now, of course, it is always going to be possible if you get overwhelmed by too many boarding actions, and that really can happen a lot of the time. So it is still eventually going to be a priority to get your boys up to the level cap level, so that you've got 79 troop rating, and that's the highest you can really get it with Orcs, because unfortunately their favors don't really increase that. But for now, one of the things that I like getting for the Orcs is Grots. It reduces the cooldown timer of all of your skills by 4%. Orcs are kind of skill dependent. All these abilities sort of, they have to use a little bit more often than other people. It's not super, though, important on these initial ships, so we're going to go ahead and get Master Gunner just to cause those criticals early on. I find that works out quite well, just try and get those done. And the reason that, like, Grots aren't great for this type is because you don't have that many skills on this type of Orc ship. So once you've accumulated more on a bigger ship, those ones definitely want Grots early on. And even here, Grots can be a good idea. So let's go ahead and get more Master Gunner on this guy, just so that the critical chance going up on these heavy guns is going to be kind of ridiculous. But anyway, let's look at upgrades for both of them. This one is our heavy cannon and lots of guns on the side sort of thing. Now, for Orcs, you can't really use these all that beneficially. Like, heavy guns is actually pretty good, being able to ignore some of the armor of your opponent, but things like Grot Gunners doesn't actually do anything because your guns are too short range. You could increase the range to 9,000, but that really doesn't help you much, because without also having Grot Gunners, you're gonna, like, that's a 3k band where you're getting benefit from 2 of these features. That's a lot to spend for something that's going to end up being kind of crappy, because your damage output at that distance is still going to be worse than a Chaos ship. So ultimately, for Chaos, or for Orcs, I would say that something like more teleporters or more shields. Extra shields is what I'm going to get here, but definitely feel like those are the best choices to get. You could also get the chained Squigs, which let you execute your captain. And my thoughts on this are, if your ships are losing so badly that they're trying to warp out, usually letting them warp out is just as good as letting them mutiny, or even better, because you don't need really to have a low health ship that's on a losing fight stick around. Letting it just flee is probably for the best in a lot of situations. So for the Orcs, I definitely think that things like extra shields, so that they're even better at bashing it along the side there, is a good idea. The other thing that you want to do with them, though, you might want to get something like lots of thrusters, because that lets the Orcs boost more distance more often, and that can really help them when they've got those problematic enemies that are keeping away from them. It won't solve that problem all that much by itself, but it is a road to getting that solved. For me, I'm going to go ahead and get the extra shields for just right now. And I think that that's a decent early choice for newer players when you don't have the nuances necessarily to win against more advanced kiting players. You're probably not going to win even if you've got the extra thrusters. Lots of thrusters, it just isn't going to work out for you necessarily all that well. So those are the sort of things that I like taking on the Orc ships early on. You'll notice me taking the extra shields on a lot of ships, and that's because it's a very solid, reliable, dependable ability in the early tiers. Later on, when you've got heavier cruisers that don't have as much benefit from that, you're going to see me taking it less, but it's still a pretty good one for those higher tier ships. It's just that you're literally doubling your shield hit point pool when you take it here. Whereas with, like, say, a battleship, where it's got, I think, 400 shields by default, you're only increasing it by 25%. So it's not a big boost for a battlecruiser. Anyway, that's our look at the Orcs. I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.